Oftentimes, not doing what we're told is what leads to positive altering of unfair practices and unfair handling of Blacks in America.
It's time to exhale and be motivated. Annie's Blue Couch. Yeah.
Hey Anisa, and happy Black History Month. I hope you all have been taking some time to celebrate African Americans this month and their contributions to America and their contributions to changing our entire world as it pertains to racism, inequalities, and injustices. I'm truly proud to be Black. I'm learning so much about the history of my people and just really appreciating how far we've come and making a conscious effort to not settle for where we are, but to continue to address, to point out, just not ignore any unfairness. I said in my last video that the reality of it is that things will never be perfect, because just as committed as you and I may be to growth and improvement and change, there are lots of people committed to ignorance and committed to sin. I know you've definitely or probably heard of Jim Crow laws. It's not one of those things that's hidden per se. But just in case you've never heard of it, Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. They existed from the post-Civil War era until around 1968. These laws were put in place to marginalize African Americans. We were denied the right to vote, to hold jobs, or to even get an education. Even though slavery was technically abolished, these laws were the way to keep Blacks oppressed and without opportunities. Segregation was a huge aspect of Jim Crow laws. You name it, it was segregated. Public parks were forbidden for African Americans to enter, and theaters and restaurants were segregated. Waiting rooms at bus and train stations, bathrooms, building entrances, elevators were all segregated. Can you imagine there were segregated cemeteries? It really blows my mind the level of ignorance white America was committed to, and sad to say, some still are, to perpetuate this negative perception of Black America to effectively shut us out of everything. And rest assured, if you dared to defy these laws, you were subject to fines or jail time, which was more likely given to a white person who broke the law. But to Black people who dared to break these laws, we were subject to violence and death. It was not uncommon to see signs posted at town and city limits warning African Americans that they were not welcome there. Some states required separate textbooks for Black and white students. In Atlanta, African Americans in court were given a different Bible from the white people to swear on. Just horrible. I can spend the entire month discussing the absolute horrifying stupidity of these Jim Crow laws. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of it for today's conversation. In your personal deep dive, it's something to really check out for yourself. For today's deep dive into Black history in America, I want to highlight an extremely brave woman by the name of Ida B. Wells. As insane and degrading and ungodly as the era of the Jim Crow laws was, it was also a time of extreme bravery for African Americans. Around the country, we were stepping up and stepping out and taking leadership roles to turn these laws around. September 15th, 1883, Ida B. Wells was forcibly removed from a first-class train car designated for white people only. She refused to go to the front coach area for colored people. The interaction started out pretty civilized, but her refusal caused the train conductor to physically remove her. When he called for help, a couple white passengers in the car she was in came to his rescue and got Ida off the train. Her dress was torn. Thankfully, she didn't lose her life in the altercation. And let me pause right here and say that many people wrongfully excuse abuse to Black people, stating things like they should have just listened. They should have just done what they were told. And to be honest, the mom in me who doesn't want to lose my Black son to a racist encounter or lose my Black daughters to a racist encounter tells them, do what you're told. Come home alive. But if we choose not to do what we're told, when what we're told is racist and unfair and degrading, our stance being met with violence isn't and should never be addressed as a you got what you deserve kind of a thing. You know what I'm saying? So in your processing of information and so-called facts, be careful of the narrative you choose to engage in whenever you regurgitate an encounter you see on the media. Oftentimes, not doing what we're told is what leads to positive altering of unfair practices and unfair handling of Blacks in America. She sued the railroad in 1884. She won the lawsuit, but in 1885, the decision was reversed by a higher court. That didn't stop her, though. If anything, it riled her up. The injustices towards Black people are enough to light a fire under anybody to do something. She devoted herself to fighting Jim Crow laws and became a prominent activist against them. Her most effective mode of fighting was writing. She used the newspaper to fight for change. And in 1889, she became co-owner of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight newspaper. She took on issues like school segregation, sexual harassment, and even lynching. In one of her most famous columns, she attacked the supposed reason for the lynching of Black men, which at the time was predominantly the raping of white women. She suggested in her writing that white women only claimed rape after their illicit affairs with Black men had been discovered. Free Speech and Headlight became the most radical and most talked about newspaper in Memphis. But after Edward Ward Carmack, a white man who was an attorney, a political figure, he served as a U.S. Senator from Tennessee from 1901 to 1907. And he was the editor of the Memphis Commercial, which was another paper at the time. After, in one of his columns, he demanded retaliation against the Black wench, which was Ida B. Wells, for her denunciation of the lynchings. The offices of her newspaper, Free Speech and Headlight, were demolished by an angry white mob. The threat on her life became too much for her to bear, and she had to leave the South and move to the North. No copy of the Free Speech and Headlight, as well as the other 25 Black-owned newspapers of the era, have been preserved. No library or archive has preserved any copies. Our only knowledge of the once thriving and outspoken African-American newspaper comes from reprinted articles in other newspapers. Ida is remembered as one of the early leaders in the fight for African-American civil rights. Her campaign against lynching really brought to light the injustice of this disgusting practice to the rest of the country and the world, really. I mentioned in my discussion on D.L. Hughley's Surrender White People that the anti-lynching bill is still, 2021, still not passed. She was one of the original founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. She started the first African-American kindergarten in Chicago. There's so much more to her story and her bravery that you can dive into on your own personal time. I had honestly never heard of many of the details I'm sharing today, and that's why I'm taking the time to do these deep dives during Black History Month. I want us all to gain a greater understanding and respect for our history so we can better appreciate our present and never stop fighting for an even better future. So make sure to subscribe to Annie's Blue Couch. Hit the notification bell so that you're notified every time a new video is released. And don't forget to leave me a comment and hit the like button for today. Until next time, remember, you are beautiful. You are special. Your smile is amazing. And don't let anyone or anything ever make you feel less than who and what God has designed you to be. Annie's crew, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Bye for now.
Annie's Blue Couch.